We all make mistakes. It's unavoidable, and maybe there are things that come back to us at 1 a.m. while we lie in our bed staring at the ceiling and losing another hour of sleep, or maybe they are just ordering the spicy sauce for a kebab. And we may regret those choices right after, or even years later, but at some point we come to appreciate them or find them funny. And we always learn stuff from them. This is something everybody has heard. You have probably heard it a million times. But we aren't taught to think the same thing about scientists. And I think those mistakes are the ones that we learn the most from. And we should really learn to appreciate them and not judge doctors or scientists, because we judge them based on the knowledge we have now. But let me show you an example, and hopefully I will be able to teach you more than on 3 months of online classes. So allow me to tell you about the so-called mistakes that caused a shift in the understanding of the human brain. Lobotomy, the science of cutting brains. An important part of psychosurgery, which had a huge impact on psychology in the 40s. Let's take a step back to look at the backstory of the idea. The science of human interaction with the organ can be traced back to ancient civilizations. Some skeletons, I wanted to change the slide, but sure. Yeah, some skeletons found in foregone graves had holes drilled into their skulls. And archaeologists have concluded that those openings were created ante mortem, so before the people died. And on that basis, we can assume that people back then already had the suspicion that the brain is behind abnormal behavior. And a couple centuries later, we start searching for that source again. The psychologists were desperate in the 1930s. With overcrowded hospitals, the stigma around them still coasting, and new diseases emerging after the war, and prior forms of therapy failing. So no wonder everyone was searching for a new way to help patients. In those circumstances, doctors took interest in the insides of our head. The experiment started, of course, on chimpanzees, who are uncomfortably similar to us, and yet different enough that we can freely experiment on them. The research was auspicious, and a guy called Egasmodis quickly moved on to patients from whom there wasn't much hope. His method started gaining popularity mostly in the US, and it was Walter Freeman and James Watts who really liked his ideas. But his idea required the assistance of a neurosurgeon. And Walter Freeman, who was probably the most enthusiastic about the method, wasn't a neurosurgeon. So he started developing a new technique. Sorry for the gruesome pictures, I guess. So he started developing a new technique which allowed him to operate on his own without the assistance of a surgeon. He figured out he could access the brain through the gap located in the eye socket and have access to the brain, damaging it with an ice pick. I'm sorry, my slide is too soon. Guys, my slides!
Oh.
Okay. Thank you, yes. Okay, and so he used the gap in the eye socket and an ice pick to reach the brain. And this method was absolutely not precise at all. He didn't see what he was doing and created an absolute mess in the patient's brain. But at least it was quick and very inexpensive, because instead of 2 doctors, you only needed 1, and instead of the 20-minute procedure, you had a 5-minute therapy. And he didn't see the problem in doing the procedure this way, so he himself carried out over 4,000 lobotomies. Around the same time, when Freeman was still perfecting his ice pick ways, another surgeon, William B. Scoville, developed a different approach, because he was a surgeon, and he didn't have to make any sacrifices in the way of reaching the brain. So he decided to stay with the original concept of drilling holes into the skull, but he opted for a more optimal placement, and instead of on the sides, he drilled them above the eyes, and this made it easier for him to access the frontal lobe of the patient, and especially when using a spoon-like tool that he did. And so, and I got lost, I'm sorry. And it was a less invasive method, but it was way slower, and it took more time, and it required a pristine environment. Skilled doctor, and yes, again, more time. Whereas the Freeman way was very quick, inexpensive, and it demanded less preparation. And this is why the two lobotomy enthusiasts had a little rivalry between the two, and they both had opponents and supporters. But there was something significant in William B. Scoville's career, and it wasn't significant only for him, it was very huge for our whole knowledge about the brain. So on a beautiful day in 1953, Mr. Scoville had a scheduled patient, as per usual, and it was Henry, a boy suffering from severe epilepsy, which stopped him from attending college or getting a job, and he was fully dependent on his parents, while he, at the time of the appointment, was an adult. And they tried a lot of different treatment ways, and none of them were successful, so they ended up deciding that lobotomy was the only and last hope. After the consultation, William Scoville was eager to operate, so they scheduled the appointment and it went through. And there wouldn't be anything special about Henry, but Scoville decided that he wasn't going to do the treatment as usual, and he didn't operate on the frontal lobe. He decided to dive into the well, I can't speak today, I'm sorry. Decided to dive into something, the great unknown, the part we knew nothing about, and it was the hippocampus area. Yes, and it was very deep, and we knew nothing about it, what it did. So, and his fascination was so big with that area that he, instead of just damaging it or cutting a part out, he decided to remove the whole hippocampus and surrounding parts of it. And he did this so precisely that Henry did survive the surgery and then lived until 2008. But just like with most lobotomies, there were some side effects. Obviously, after cutting someone's brain, there will be side effects. But in this case, they were different, and nobody expected what they were. So Henry lost the ability to create new memories. And he remembered everything from before the surgery. He still remembered short-term things, but he lost the ability to create long-lasting memories. For example, he was informed several times that his parents died, yet he still asked about their well-being because he thought that they were alive. One of the doctors that worked with him for years had to introduce herself every single time she came to see him because he didn't remember him. And if you were having a conversation with Henry and you would leave to go to the toilet, when coming back, you would have to introduce yourself again because he wouldn't know who you are. He just didn't remember almost anything. It was so severe. And it was fascinating for doctors, and it resulted in a lot of experiments. And only thanks to Henry Molaison and William Scoville do we now know what the hippocampus is responsible for. And if it wasn't for that work, we would still be oblivious to the mechanics of the brain. And that's with all lobotomies. They taught us a lot about the organ, helping us understand how it works, which parts are crucial, which could potentially be removed, and what they are responsible for. We also learned that we are not yet ready to treat patients with this method because, unfortunately, most of them resulted in death or leaving the patients hindered in a different way they were before. Although some patients did wind up after the lobotomy to be completely fine and leave the hospital to lead a normal life and even have jobs and families. And lobotomies aren't performed anymore. This isn't a surprise because around the 1950s they were pushed back because new drugs were created and they had a better pros and cons ratio. And even after the discoveries lobotomies led us to, and the amounts of knowledge they have provided us with, they still get a bad rep. They are represented in movies as something a madman would do and always have catastrophic results. They shouldn't be frowned upon, I think, and they shouldn't just be called a mistake or something evil or inhumane, because even if they were those things, at the end of the day, they were a good option at the time. They were one of the only options for desperate scientists who had no idea how to help patients. They helped some people, and they made us learn incredible things about the brain. So I think we should look at the broader picture when talking about mistakes made by scientists and doctors. Just like with our mistakes. Let's accept them and try to appreciate the knowledge that they have provided us with. Thank you.